Today we're going to talk about, or what I'm going to talk about, is visualizing bridges between research and practice. And I'm working on this with Dr. Nicole Fonger. She just had a baby, so she's on maternity leave right now. So I told her I would take this and run with it. A little bit about me. I'm a math educator. I've taught for over 7 years. Right now, I work with a couple of teacher centers providing professional development. I'm working on my CAS at Syracuse University, and I reached out to Nicole like a little over a year ago because I really was interested in what she was researching. And now I work to help her and support her in her research. So all the drawings that you see in this presentation are done by Dr. Fonger. So I did not sketch note any of it. She specializes as part of her research in sketchnoting as a communication form, and she's really good at it. And so I've used her sketch notes throughout this presentation. So all those little drawings are all her. The ideas are hers, and it's kind of my interpretation of what she's put together. So if we start, we're just going to do introductions and overview of kind of the disconnect between research and practice. And we're going to then look at that issue through a networked lens, and then hopefully have some time for some open discussion and some open questions. So our goals for this session, and when I say our, I say as in me and Dr. Fonger, is feedback on looking at mathematics research with this equity lens, and then ideas for bridging the gap between research and practice. We have an interest in developing a partnership, and so we're just kind of laying the groundwork and figuring out what would that look like, what would the best ways to put that together be. So we're looking for feedback, and as such, feel free to provide your thoughts and commentary. I'm going to have a Google form at the end of the session so that you can provide individual anonymous feedback on the open questions we have. We would love to see what you have to say, and hopefully we will have time. But feel free to put it in the chat, or I think there's not that many of us, 16. So feel free to just contribute. And so from you guys, I'm curious, what made you decide to attend this session today as opposed to any of the others, because there were a couple others going on right now, and what are you looking for? And you can either put that in the chat or you can feel free to speak. I'd love to hear that. And Nicole had a little girl, beautiful little girl. So if you wouldn't mind putting kind of what made you pick this session and what you're kind of looking for out of it. Interested as an instructional leader on how to bring research into the classroom? Awesome. Anyone else? Okay. Well, if it shows up in the chat, I'll see it after. So these are kind of the truths that we know. All of these following things are true. So research practice partnerships have great potential. There's, a ton of agreement around this, that a research practice partnership has a ton of potential to help support student learning and further research. Leaders on both sides, researchers and school leaders or educational leaders, call for improved use of research evidence to inform teaching. That's also true, right? And then yet, despite those two truths, the work of both practitioners, and I'll use teachers and practitioners interchangeably for my purposes today, but the work of both practitioners and researchers continues to be done separately. So the question is, why? If we know that research is, we want more research in classrooms and partnerships have great potential, why is this work still being done separately? So I'm curious what your thoughts are. If you want to just put in the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself. I'm curious, why do you think that, there is a gap between research and practice? Someone says research translating it into practice is hard. Totally agree. Time, big one. No avenue for communication. Agreed. Yeah, there seem to be a lot of barriers. Teaching can be isolating. Yes. Yes. As a teacher for 7 years, I totally agree. And so research doesn't account for many different variables, classroom to classroom. Yes, and this is why I love talking to Nicole too, because she has a researcher lens and I have a teacher lens, and we have really great conversations kind of about this problem. So we have an opportunity here to focus on partnership between practitioners and researchers, and we have an opportunity to come together to support students' opportunities to learn meaningful mathematics. And so this is what we want to explore today, kind of this open question, and then how we can view the problem with a different framework and see if there are any opportunities there. So these are the sketch notes of Nicole. And we know that this disconnect between research and practice remains a key challenge. And this disconnect has resulted in a lack of impact. So that's that first little sketch, a lack of impact because there's a gap, right? So research doesn't get implemented into classrooms. We know that there's boundaries between researchers and teachers. They kind of move in their separate circles and they don't really interact very much. So there's boundaries there and they don't communicate often. And because of these two things, there's a gap between research and practice. And this gap stands between students learning math better. So one of our open questions is, who considers this a problem? So I'm curious, do you personally consider this research practice gap a problem? Yes or no? You can put it in the chat. You got at least one yes, yay. Okay, couple of yeses. Good. So as researchers, this is a problem for us because our research is meant to be taken up in the field. But if it's not being taken up in the field and influencing student learning, then why are we doing it in the first place? It is kind of a biased sample because you all were interested in this talk. So I was, you're absolutely right. Totally biased sample in this. So what does the research say about this research practice gap? So current research has identified three main barriers, and the three main barriers are here. So accessibility is a big one. Researchers often share their work passively and making it available via scholarly outlets that often have restricted access. And teachers often don't engage with these publications or attend the same conferences. The one publication, journal, and conference that I as a teacher would attend was NCTM, anything NCTM, but that was about it. And I know Nicole publishes in a ton of different journals and has gone to a ton of different conferences. But if she wants her research taken up by teachers, this disconnect is a real problem. So it's accessibility is one of them. Researchers are also often interested in knowledge production and theory development, not necessarily the concrete evidence that practitioners want. So relevance is another barrier. And often the way I read any of the research articles is kind of like, okay, so what? So now what? So how do I do it, right? How do I actually do this in my classroom? And like someone said before, the context matters. So that's why, there isn't a prescription for how to implement these ideas. But as teachers, we want to do that. We learn about something, we want to do it right away. And we don't have a lot of the time to think about how to do them well. You kind of just want to, you have so many things in front of you, so many kids in front of you, you have a job to do. So relevance is a big one. And then lastly, timeliness. So information has to be available when it's needed. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. So given the two above factors with accessibility and relevance, you add on timeliness, and there are three big barriers why there's a gap between research and practice. So there's also some models that have been kind of explored in the research. And these models, as they move along, are increasingly blurred boundaries. And so the models for connecting, the first one is kind of the status quo, where researchers publish and teachers read and implement on their own. And it kind of moves along the spectrum to summary guides or professional learning around research findings, to policy reports, to curriculum development. And then this last one is design-based research. So it's a form of partnership, right? Where you engage in design-based research to engineer classroom innovations and develop local theories in hope to influence teaching and then take it to a broader audience. That is a form of partnership. And we're interested in partnership, but the partnership model that we are interested in is a little bit more general. So it would have both researchers and practitioners looking at a problem of practice so that it's blurring the boundaries between those two communities in such a way that both practitioners and researchers become collaborators and co-creators. So that's the direction that we want to head in. And so why is this important? Well, the work of teaching includes this plan, implement, evaluate, improve cycle, right? So teachers are doing this all the time. And in order to become successful, we improve this cycle. Well, researchers over on this other end have access to all this data and information that can inform teaching. So we need to link these two so that the knowledge of researchers is linked to the work of teachers so that they can collaborate and increase student learning outcomes so students can be more successful. So right now they kind of work in their two spheres, and if we can link them in a really effective way, we have the opportunity to harness, a lot of manpower to increase student learning. And so what are we asking? So we essentially are trying to reimagine a collective responsibility. What would this look like if we had a shared vision between practitioners and researchers, if the boundaries were blurred, and if research-informed practice was the thing that brought us together? So I'm curious, does anybody have any thoughts on what I've shared so far? And you can feel free to unmute yourself or in the chat box. I'm just curious before I go on to get a little feedback on what I've shared. Any thoughts? Anyone? How can we connect researchers and teachers? Yes. It's a big open question. We don't have any answers yet. We're in the thought experiment part. Anyone else? Okay. I got more, so I'll keep going. Something will catch. So we have a bunch of tools, right? And current processes and communication and partnership models that the research has already given us. And that's kind of what I went through. And we also have a couple of metaphors that you may recognize about translating research into practice or a currency exchange. And yet these models and these metaphors still have not moved the needle much. So what we currently have may not be enough to challenge the status quo. So I'm going to take you through a little thought experiment. And this thought experiment is about, when thinking about this problem, it can be helpful to look at this problem through a different framework or different lenses. And when I first started working with Nicole and she would talk about these frameworks and these lenses, I was thinking, what in the world is she talking about? Like, I don't know what she's talking about. And she finally explained it to me as like a researcher puts on different glasses when looking at a problem to see different angles of the problem. And so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to look at this problem with different lenses. So What if we take the current knowledge and research, examined through metaphors, and then lay on top an equity framework? So we think that this can help open up ideas and thinking around the possibilities that we can change the status quo. And so what happens if we use these metaphors? And these are the two common metaphors that I mentioned before. So one of them is translate, which you've probably heard, and the other one is currency exchange. So translation of research into practice. I've heard that often. I heard currency exchange is less familiar to me, but as a teacher, translation of research into practice, I've definitely heard that one. And it often takes the form of researchers distilling and synthesizing research results and publishing those findings in books or articles. So they take their research results and then translate them for a broader audience. Currency exchange, an example would be a researcher providing professional development in exchange for access to students or teachers. For example, a teacher administering an assessment that can be used in a research study. So there's an exchange of goods. What's interesting is if you think about both these metaphors, they underscore a need for communication, a need for a change of language, and an exchange of resources across research practice communities. And it's notable that both these metaphors start from researcher knowledge bases. So instead of teacher experience and expertise, they're starting from researcher expertise. And teacher voice and perspective is largely absent in these metaphors. And so it may or may not resonate with teacher experience and understanding. And then, so if we keep those metaphor glasses in mind and we add an equity lens, this lens can allow us to see where there are opportunities and obstacles for closing this research practice gap. So what are the things on this equity lens? So access, in terms of access, do all parties have what they need in terms of concrete and material things to bridge the gap? So when we think about access, that's what we're talking about. When we think about identity, do all parties see themselves in the work? Can they see their role? Do they know what their role is? Achievement, are all the incentives aligned? And then power, what are the factors at play, but they're non-material that prevent true collaboration? So this dominant axis holds the tangible, while the critical axis holds the intangible. But all four of them must be addressed to truly bridge the divide. So when we do this, metaphor lenses, equity framework, we get this with a bunch of sketch notes. So I'm going to go through them. And the sketch notes stand for different obstacles or opportunities that have been identified. So when we think about access, like I said, does each party have what they need in terms of material and concrete support? So clearly, both researchers and teachers need support to be able to engage in research. They also need proper tools to be able to do so. And this can take the form of any tangible resource that would allow researchers and teachers to bridge the gap. Everyone needs a seat at the table. Otherwise, there's no collaborative agenda, there's no common knowledge, and sharing of resources isn't possible. In terms of paywalls, new information, like we said before, isn't often accessible, or it's not read by teachers because it's behind a paywall. So the information is not freely available, it has to be sought out. Time is a big barrier, that was mentioned. Researchers and teachers must be given, and teachers especially, must be given time to engage with each other. And someone mentioned this, how do interested parties find each other? There may be teachers who are interested in participating in research, but they don't have access to researchers, and vice versa. Each party needs to invite each other into their separate realms because of these boundaries. We talked about this for teachers. Ease of use and timeliness of research is critical. If it's not available when it's needed, it's not going to be implemented. Along the paywall line, much of current research and new knowledge is available in text form only. We need to expand those multimedia forms to make the information much more accessible to more people. And then in terms of sharing and interacting, teachers, researchers, and teams doing good work are often siloed and not connected with each other. And if they can share and interact on a network level, that would lead to better information and knowledge. And then lastly, especially for researchers, institutions need to support and recognize the importance of research being taken up in the field. There needs to be more support about fieldwork and the connections to practice. So if we move to identity, now we're going to switch into the ways that all parties see their role in the relationship. We talk about, do both teachers and researchers have ways of belonging and of participating and connecting? And do they see themselves in this work of bridging the gap between research and practice? Are the narratives for both teachers and researchers resonating? Are they aligned? We talk about the mirror. So do teachers see themselves in the mirror of the problem? And do they have access to the windows so that they can see the point of view of researchers? And vice versa. Do researchers see themselves in the problem that they're trying to solve? And do they have access to a window to see the teacher point of view? The roles, are the roles for both teachers and researchers expanding to allow for true collaboration and true co-creation of knowledge? So if they stay with the status quo, the current roles, they're going to stay separate communities. But if we expand those roles, we can start to blur those boundaries. Both researchers need teachers to conduct their research on teaching, but do teachers see the need for researchers? And that is another obstacle. And then, are the boundaries between communities of practice blurring? Is there a middle ground that we can share between both communities where they can each interact and contribute to each other? I'm going to pause real quick before I go into the next two, just to see if you have any questions about what I've stated so far. Anybody have any questions? I know it's pretty dense. Okay. I will keep going then. So we've got two more axes, or two more categories. So in terms of achievement, when we look at achievement, are the incentives of both researchers and teachers aligned? Engaging in research and the markers of status, are these the same for both teachers and researchers? I know for researchers it is, but for teachers, is there status associated with engaging in research? And is engaging in this kind of work held in the same regard for both communities? Are the communities focused on the same type of results? This is a huge one, especially as a teacher. Are researchers helping teachers get tangible results in classrooms? And that link really has to be there for buy-in, because if teachers are contributing to this and not getting tangible results, it's really difficult to put resources behind that. Do grants themselves recognize the importance of partnership between these two communities? So are there grants that work to support partnership? Is publication an incentive for both parties? Are there publications that would be amenable to both communities, where both communities would interact and read them and engage in them? And then, would closing the gap between research and practice result in growth for the individuals involved? Can both researchers and teachers grow through the process of engaging in work together? Personally, I would say yes, but this needs to be a selling point for people to jump into partnership work. I agree. The practitioners should not be made to feel inadequate by researchers. That's that whole identity. And we get into it in power. So you took the words out of my mouth. So this next part is power. That's exactly what we were getting at. So what are these non-tangible barriers that are standing in the way of the vision of blurred boundaries between research and practice? So while researchers and teachers do have very different roles, we need to recognize that there are some shared currencies that we have together. For example, there are areas of theory, methods, results, data, philosophy, where both researchers and teachers are very well aligned. So we need to capitalize on those. If we can create spaces for teachers and researchers to share and interact on an individual level, so before it was access was a network level, but power on an individual level, we can start to create those blurred boundaries. We need to use the platform of researchers to give practitioners a voice. So the current flow of information tends to be one way, from researcher to teacher. And blurring that gap can allow researchers to advocate on behalf of practitioners. Another one is policy. Policy that's made needs to be informed by both practice and research. And it needs to align the incentives of both communities so that the parties are encouraged to engage, create knowledge, and improve student learning outcomes together. Same with the status quo of regulations. Those regulations flow from state to district to teacher, and it doesn't really allow for researchers to be easily aligned with teachers and inform policy on a state level. So there's definitely some opportunity there. Both teachers and researchers should co-create knowledge that benefits student learning outcomes and each respective community. And researchers who are in the field working in partnership with teachers can help to solve that timeliness and ease of use barriers by curating resources for teachers. And this is the role that a lot of instructional coaches play, except that they wear a lot of hats. So I think this is the role that they would like to play more. And then we need to move towards a collective responsibility. And for both teachers and researchers so that they can improve their current communities, and also that they're encouraged to be aligned to improve student learning. So this is the equity framework. I went through a lot of open questions, a lot of opportunities, a lot of barriers. I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on what kind of this whole image represents. Anyone have any thoughts on this? Did this prompt your thinking at all? I remember, I read this, Nicole wrote a draft of a paper and this framework was kind of in there. And when she showed it to me, I, as a teacher, had always thought, oh yeah, there's a gap between research and practice. And that was kind of where my thinking stopped. And when I read her paper, I suddenly was like, oh, wow, there are a lot of different things that play into this. And there's a lot of opportunities for improvement, a lot of barriers at play. So it's not just as simple as like, yep, there's a gap, let's close it. And so this framework between the metaphors and the equity lens really kind of opened my eye to all the different possibilities there could be, and just to make little incremental improvements to closing that gap. So I thought it was really powerful as a teacher looking at it. Okay, so all of that to say that we're interested in studying partnership between researchers and teachers. And we believe strongly in the necessity of research-based practices in schools to improve student learning outcomes, and feel that engaging in partnership is the best way. So we want to study partnership models that we can successfully build, so that we can successfully build a partnership of our own. And so as such, we have some open questions. And these are the open questions. And I'm going to go through them, and I would love to hear what your guys' thoughts are and have an actual discussion. So if you're there and you want to turn your camera on and talk about this with us, that would be awesome. But here are the questions. What would make a partnership between researcher and practitioner interesting to you personally? What would an ideal partnership look like? What would your expectations be around partnership? What would be an incentive for engaging in partnership? And what can researchers do to support meaningful learning for students? And I also have these questions in a Google form. I'm going to put it in the chat so that if you prefer to respond that way and you have individual thoughts, that would be awesome. Otherwise, I would love to just talk about it for the time that we have left. I'm going to get the link real quick. Okay, there's the link to the Google form if you would prefer to do that. So what do you think? What would an ideal partnership look like? Any thoughts?
I think taking an actual issue that a teacher is having in the classroom and then collaborating with the research behind that, I think that that would be the most powerful. I mean, teachers have things that they worry about and things that they think about. So connecting them with that, I think would be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. We have thought about trying to build a coalition between, people in a specific district and research. So Nicole and some other researchers, about writing a collaborative grant to solve or work towards an identified problem of practice. So I totally agree with you. The problem of practice needs to be shared. What are some good ways to find a shared problem of practice? How do you even identify one? Anybody have any ideas?
I think classroom observations, like what's happening in the classroom and, classroom observations, and then the assessment data to back it up, like really looking at a certain problem of practice.
How does a researcher get access to that though? Because I'm curious, most classroom observations would be made by administrators, right?
True. It doesn't have to be. Something like a lesson study, like connecting with teachers who are doing lesson studies, I think could be really powerful for researchers to see kind of what's going on with that. That'd be a great place for observation.
That's a good idea, lesson studies. How would you find teachers who are engaging in that? What does do you engage in lesson study through a district or through like the teacher centers or?
Yeah, lots of different ways. A district can have that. A lot of grants call for that. So if a school has a grant for a lesson study, that's ours. We have a low performing block grant, and lesson study is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
They have, in California, they have something called CanMe, and it's a big coalition of a lesson study group that teachers belong to.
Oh, cool. Interesting. Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any thoughts?
This is Trina. And one of the ways that we have found things to emerge is through our teacher education program. We have a professional development school model. And so we work very, very closely with the districts where our students are placed, et cetera. And so often we work together. They may come to us as researchers or the teacher educators to say, we have a problem with this, and we'd like to work together to see about solutions to this, or help us to analyze data, or we will see it on our end as, as teacher educators of things that we want to work together on. So I think that mutual partnership through the teacher education has also opened doors, because one of the things you have to do is build a lot of trust. And so that has come about over the years with the partnership we have just in teacher education itself. So that's been very positive for us.
Thank you. I didn't think of that. Syracuse University, who we're both affiliated with, has a teacher education program. You're very right. Like we already have student teaching in schools. That's a really good way to find some problems of practice. Thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I agree with, I think maybe Tracy said earlier, with looking at assessment data, and for teachers or practitioners to reflect on their teaching and to try and find something that they want to improve on, for their students. And the researcher would have access to I guess ideas and research and theories and frameworks that the teacher may not have access to.
Mm-hmm. What would make a teacher want to engage in that with a researcher? Like outside of it, it's something additional, right? To engage in a partnership with a researcher. That's something that you don't have to do as part of your job. What would be an incentive, or what would make that appealing to a teacher?
Well, it may be a personality thing. So you'd have to find a teacher with a particular personality that would be open to that. Mm-hmm. But I think just for a teacher to have more insight would be motivation.
Yeah, right. Partnership, you're self-selecting for people that probably are pretty reflective and want some help and guidance with that. Does anybody else have any ideas on incentives for engaging in partnership with teachers, or for teachers, teacher incentives? Does anybody have any other thoughts on any of those open questions?
Hi. So
Hi.
I'm actually a PhD student at Syracuse. So
cool.
But so I taught in high school up to this point for the most part, and I would say one of the biggest things, like I would always be interested in research and what's going on and being able to implement it. But when you're teaching 3 different classes, 2 of them that are regents, and your lesson plan, and there's not time. I mean, like I'd be lucky that I got to read the article, read something about it, but having time to then engage with a researcher and help them do stuff, I think an incentive for me would have been, well, by doing this, I'm somehow not doubling my workload.
Exactly. So, and I totally get your perspective, because I am a math teacher of 7 years. So one of the ideas that we're kind of playing with is maybe some way to either par down. If you work in a research partnership, you only have like one less prep. So maybe you only do one prep and you're working with the researcher directly, or perhaps maybe you have some time. So you have an additional planning. We have no idea how this would get done. Just if in a perfect world, if by engaging with a researcher, you got an extra planning block, or you had one less prep, would that be an incentive for you? Would that help sweeten the deal? We're trying to think of things like that, because absolutely time is probably the number one barrier for teachers. Absolutely. So what are some ideas to give teachers time to do it? You know what I mean? Would those be appealing to you, or no?
I mean, my favorite teaching position was the one that I had literally one prep. I mean, I had one prep and then like one bonus thing that was like a fun class, so it wasn't too bad in regards to prep, and you know, it was great. You actually had time to like develop stuff. So for me personally, yes, but in schools I've been in, that's not always. You might have to pay the admin off to convince them to let you only have one prep.
That's what a grant is for. No. Yes, no, I know. It's a challenge. It's a challenge that we're trying to be creative and think of ways around it, because really there's a lot of power behind partnerships. So we're trying to figure out how to get it done, right?
Something that I participated in and I think could work well, our curriculum had a summer program where teachers became researchers. So it was like a teacher research summer, and we spent a whole week together and figured out a problem of practice. And then we met monthly. So it was after school had started, and then we just kind of gathered observational data and other data in our classroom and then kind of shared that out. So that summer, I mean, teachers have some time in the summer. So if you're using a grant, trying to come up with like the bulk of the, how are we going to do this? That's, I mean, that's the hard part, is that really, how are we going to structure this and how is it going to work?
Right. What was that run through a university or a college or?
It was run through our publisher. So CPM does that. They have a teacher research program.
CPM. Okay, awesome. I'll have to look that up. Awesome. Thank you. Does anybody have any other thoughts?